Yeah, thanks so much for coming, everybody. It's a full room. Couldn't fit many more people in here. My name's Ammon, and I'm CEO and founder of Triplebyte, which is a hiring marketplace for engineers. And so what that means basically is that we have a database of pre-screened engineering candidates, and hiring managers can go on and see tens of thousands of candidates along with a bunch of data. And so data on what the candidates are looking for, what their motivations are, and then also skills assessment. And so sort of how each of those candidates did across a kind of a variety of technical assessments. The topic we're here today to talk about is hiring, how to hire and retain engineers. And this is an extremely important topic. I think hiring is probably the single most important thing that a company has to get right in order to be successful. A company fundamentally is the people it hires. And hiring good people is hard. It's a process that can go wrong in lots of ways. You can fail to source people, fail to bring in candidates who are a good fit for your open roles. You can be biased. You can be, in the worst case, sexist or racist or other terrible forms of bias in your screening process. You might invest, tens of hours and tens of thousands of dollars in a candidate, but fail to really, convince that candidate, sell your vision, and that candidate, you might make an offer and that candidate might go somewhere else. And so today we're going to talk about strategies to avoid some of these problems. Before we jump in, I want to do one more show of hands. So let's see. Can you raise your hand if you are a recruiter or work in a talent organization? Okay, so a minority of people here. Can you raise your hand if you are an engineer or an engineering manager? Okay, so that's mostly the background. And finally, can you raise your hand if you hit your hiring goals for engineers last year and are happy with your recruiting pipeline for engineering? Yeah? Perhaps more hands than I was expecting, actually, but not very many hands. And that's evidence of the fact that this is a hard problem. So let me introduce the panel. First, we have Kathryn Koehler. Kathryn is Senior Director of Engineering on the Science Group at the Zuckerberg Initiative. She's a deeply experienced engineering leader with a focus on mentoring, scaling diverse teams, and reinforcing engineering best practices. Before the Zuckerberg Initiative, Kathryn built teams at Evernote, Ericsson, and Gaia Interactive. We also have Clay Allsopp. Clay is head of engineering for growth and seller experience at Opendoor. He's an experienced engineering manager who has built and led teams at Teespring and Palantir. And he's also a Teal Fellow and wrote a book on iOS development with Ruby. And finally, we have Surabhi Gupta. Surabhi is Director of Engineering at Airbnb, where she heads the homes business, which includes growth, hosts, and pricing. She previously led a 100-engineer marketplace conversion team. And prior to Airbnb, Surabhi was a staff engineer at Google and holds a master's degree from Stanford with a focus on artificial intelligence. So thank you to the panel. Okay, let's start with Clay. So the first step in hiring an engineer is sourcing. So finding a candidate who's a plausibly a good fit for your role. Can you talk about kind of how you go about that process?
Yeah, can y'all hear me? Okay, probably. I think that'll change depending on where you're at in the phase of the company. I'm curious, how many of y'all are hiring for like very small companies, like under 10 engineers? Anyone doing like 10 to 50, 50 to 100, and then like maybe over 500, like very large companies? Okay, cool. So I think the strategies are going to change a lot as you move up that spectrum. If you look at somewhere like Opendoor, the first 4 engineer hires were all like former coworkers of the founders. I think that's a a pretty typical and common way to start is to kind of work your network as a founder or as an early team, and mostly because the appeal of working at a very early stage company is going to be predominantly mission-based. Either you align very heavily with the mission of that company and you're super excited about it, or you know the people there and you're really excited to work with those people. I think it's important, though, when you're in an early company, to also branch out a little bit and use a lot of sourcing like services that exist now, like Triplebyte or Hired, or any of these other things that exist to actually sort of branch outside of your network, which might be sort of not as diverse as you would hope to actually start your company. And then as you get further up the funnel, you can start actually doing outbound cold sourcing, where you use LinkedIn Recruiter, all that sort of like good stuff, doing brand, sort of brand recruiting through blog posts, all those sort of things. But it's a very big topic, but I'm curious what you all think about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very open-ended question. I think I agree with what Clay said, that it changes quite a bit as the company grows. At this point for us, Airbnb, we had 1,500 engineers. We have a lot of people that recognize the brand, that want to come and work at the company. But at other stages of the company, I definitely saw sort of more targeted outreach. And in general, let's say that we want to grow out, the growth team, then we do want to sort of attract and find people that have that expertise and make sure that, we can have customization. I think in general, sort of one takeaway everybody should have is it's all about customization. Because everybody wants different things, everybody gets attracted to different types of problems, what type of mission in the company, what type of founders. So you just, there are lots of people out there, and you just want to make sure that your approach can be tailored to sort of what you're looking for at that point.
So you're saying that it's worth spending time to write a custom outreach to each candidate and not take more of a sort of spray and pray approach?
Yeah, as much as possible, right? And especially if you're looking for more senior engineers or engineering managers, people want to be able to associate with the team and the company. So yes, customization there as well. In fact, for some people, what I've seen is that you even try to attract people with having, events where you can actually tell them more about the company. Because some people need a lot more selling, right? And again, you need to figure out how critical that role is, how hard it is to hire. You might have so much customization in the role that there might only be like a handful of people that, are even eligible for that position. So you just need to work that much harder.
Yeah, CZI is interesting. A lot of people don't understand what we do there that's technical, or what it is, or think it's a vanity play. It's not. And so for us, primarily it's getting the word out about what we do and what technical opportunities there are. And we do a lot of sourcing with non-traditional candidates because we want to walk the walk in terms of diversity and hiring and things like that. So we're not so much at the Stanford and the Berkeley career fairs. We're partnering with schools like UC Merced, which are commuter campuses where we have a lot of first-generation kids going to school. We partner with DevColor. We partner with Lesbians Who Code. We take kids out of the Make School. It's fantastic. So we are getting the word out in sort of that secondary channel of sourcing, because it's really part of our strategic and moral imperative to make sure that we're hiring diverse candidates.
You've hired from Make School?
Yep.
Awesome.
We have two fantastic candidates from the Make School that have both accepted their offers. So props. It's a plug. $20 later.
Surabhi, you mentioned kind of seniority in the process. Is there any, what's different about how you approach more senior, maybe even leadership or executive level candidates?
Okay, so it is a long game. So one thing I would say is that a lot of it is building relationships. And the company's name can only take you so far, right? Like, let's say I'm hiring someone, they are interviewing me just as much as I'm interviewing them, right? Like, they want to make sure that I would be a good manager, a good leader for the organization. And so it is very, very important to sort of think of how are you building those relationships, how are you portraying yourself, So I would just start with, don't think of it as like, okay, I'm going to take a month and fill this role. Sometimes actually that's unrealistic, right? You also need to think of whether you want to partner with an exec recruiting firm. Do you have the in-house resources for it? Because you might reach out to 50 candidates, and it might not be the right time for any of them, right? Because when you're looking for these senior roles, these people are all doing amazing things, and they can't just pick up and leave. They have their own teams, large teams that are doing a lot of that. They've signed up for all these goals. So again, you want to sort of make sure that you have enough top of the funnel, and that the people coming in, you can build relationships with them. And then maybe 6 months down the line, it's like, hey, actually, we have this other role, not the role I initially had in mind, but are you interested in it?
I sometimes feel that we're in a better position to hire the executive positions. These are the folks that want to do a tour of duty at a philanthropy, or they've had an equity event in their life, which is a nice way of putting it. Or we just hired an exec from Google Ads. They need to pay down a debt to society, right? Like, have a clean slate. And I played that really hard during the interview. I'm like, you owe us at least 10 years, because you know who I'm talking about. Anyway, but for us, you'll get a call from Priscilla, you'll get a call from Mark to bring you in either at the front or the end of the hiring process to make sure that we're really selling as much as we possibly can.
How does brand play into it? So we've seen in our business that companies with a stronger consumer brand tend to have much higher closing rates. It's much easier for them to source candidates, so they have much higher closing rates. Do you have any thoughts about kind of how that differs? Any tips for companies that might not have that name brand?
Yeah, so I think Opendoor is an interesting example of that, where we are like a consumer product, but we actually don't operate really in the San Francisco Bay Area. For a little bit of background, Opendoor, you sell your home to Opendoor instead of selling it through a real estate agent, and then we resell it on the market. So it's very expensive and very risky to do that in San Francisco, so we don't do it here. But our main engineering office is here, and it's both challenging for us internally to like dog food our product, as well as ultimately hire candidates, because they're not downloading it, they're not booking rooms on Airbnb with it. I think the things that we lean on a lot are in the like outreach that we do in sourcing, or is like stats about our growth, talking about our impact that we have on our customers. So we say like we empower customers to go through like one of the most complex, stressful parts of their lives to make it super simple. We try to like really crisply define that mission statement. And we also try to like toss in a few links to whether it's recent fundraising or in-depth blog posts, that sort of thing. And I think that helps the folks who read those messages get a little bit more information about Opendoor than they might have before. Like, oh, you guys have raised like 7 rounds of funding. You're actually like a real company. You're not like a seed stage sort of thing. And that helps bridge the gap a little bit. But I do think a lot of the open rate of those emails is predominantly at what company name is in the subject line. And that's why we're working on that in a lot of ways, but it'll take time.
One thing I'll add is, yes, sort of Airbnb, you don't need to explain it anymore, but the brand can work for you or against you, meaning that, some people tell us, oh, Airbnb is so big, I want to work for a startup, and, we still think we have such a long way to go. So again, I mean, the number of conversations I've had with people that no, that we are sort of at the early stage of, this area of work, while other areas of work might be a little bit more mature. Like we still have to explain all of that. So your brand, I would say that has both sides of a coin.
A common conversation I have with people that I'm trying to attract is, will working at CZI affect my career? Because it's a non-traditional technical company. So it's not as if I'm coming out of a Facebook or a Google with a pedigree. And I said, oh, Lordy, we've got folks from Facebook and Google at CZI. And it's actually trickier to work here because our path is less clear. We're trying to solve the world's problems, not like click-through rates or things like that. I'm not belittling anything that anyone is doing here, by the way. At all, seriously. But it is like so ambiguous and so weird, and working with scientists and educators and policymakers, it's yet another dimension to that multidisciplinary, cross-functional brew that I have to sort of play that up because people are worried. they're like, I have that on my resume. Is that going to be something that will attract later on? And that's something we have to talk about.
I noticed that none of you highlighted inbound as a source, people applying directly to your company through a careers page. What percentage of hires, if you know roughly, have come through inbound?
You want to start?
You go for it.
Okay. I want to say it's like a third for referrals, inbound, and sourcing. So you have to, at least for us, I found, and actually I found this consistent over the years, and so I know you need to keep all channels going. The other interesting factor would be, how does the incoming source correlate with performance within the company? I don't actually know that, but that would be an interesting sort of stat to know.
I think for us, it's actually much lower on the inbound, so that's interesting to I'm guessing that like Airbnb has that brand, right, where people just know about it and they don't apply on the website, sort of cold. I think for us, it's much lower. I don't know the actual stat, but like I can think of maybe 1 or 2 hires we've made out of 50 to 60 in the past year that have been from inbound applications and that weren't like cold sourced or triple-byted or something like that. So it's definitely much lower for us, and I wonder if that correlates with the brand.
I think, I should say, that's what I think the numbers are. I hope it's true.
Yeah, I don't have statistics on this, but I know we do have a lot of inbound people because they are seeking out mission work. And we also have a lot of referrals from the White House and from Facebook. So it's pretty funny.
Across all the companies in our platform, we see that inbound varies a lot by brand. So like sort of consumer big brand companies have significant inbound funnels, and early stage startups and kind of more niche, more B2B companies, it's often 2%, 3%, a very small percentage of total hires. Okay, let's move on to talk about interviewing. So kind of how you decide if a candidate is someone that's a good fit for your company. Let's see. I guess, Clay, how do you think about experience during the interview? So do you use the same interview process for junior candidates and for more experienced candidates?
I have the direct answer to that, but I think the more interesting thing to talk about is like the philosophy on how we arrive at that. I think the philosophy that I think works best for hiring is framing it as an interview is trying to figure out, will this person do well for the expectations of that role when they join? And I think there's a different philosophy that some companies and folks have used historically, which is roughly like, is this person really, really smart? And you can get to kind of the same outcomes in a lot of ways, but I think the way that we think about it is like, hey, what is this role? What are the expectations of that role? Hopefully that maps sort of one-to-one with like a career ladder, and then you can back out like how you change your interview loop in response to that. So for senior hires, you'd expect them to like do a little bit more of like system design sort of work than like day-to-day coding. You'd expect their coding to be slightly more like practical in nature, and so we actually try to tailor the loops to that, so that like you're doing 2 systems design interviews. One of them is almost always a past project, so talk us through like a meaty project with some like interesting trade-offs and substance. And in general, like the work we do at Opendoor is a little bit more of like business logic, CRUD sort of apps, that sort of stuff. So our questions try to reflect that as well, and we try to again match that to would you succeed at this role at the company versus like some really crazy algo thing. Maybe if you're a database company that makes sense, but not really for us.
So does that mean that the requirements are different for different engineering roles?
Generally, like in a lot of cases, yes, but I think there's also like nuance on like a junior engineer, right? And there's like a lot of difference between someone who's from Waterloo that has like 5 internships at like practically 2 years of experience versus someone who's coming from a school with maybe 1 internship, and that's not like Berkeley, CMU, that sort of thing. And so I think we think about that when we talk about, hey, this person might come in today knowing like Git and know how to do Ruby on Rails and be super productive. Is that what we're looking for? Is that like 1, has that map to the open roles, and then 2, how does that map to like will they do well on for this role when they get there?
We have the philosophy of try to figure out what people know, not what they don't know. And so when I was younger and interviewing technically more than I'm doing now, it was good sport to figure out what people didn't know and just watch them squirm. But here, you try to really pivot on what they do know and explore that area. And so we're trying to hire good technologists. We also leverage a company called Carrot to do our initial screening, Karat, which is a good barrier to entry for us. There's pretty good signal to noise there. And we allow people to retake their interview if they didn't do well. Who knows what's going on in their life during that day? Maybe they didn't show up the way they wanted to, and we give them a second chance. We've even had the opportunity to give people second chances who have done just terribly during the on-site, where we say, hey, why don't you come in and sit with the team for a week, and we'll see how it goes. And one of our top performers in the data science team came in that way. So it's just non-traditional candidates, non-traditional ways of interviewing, what works for those people. I've also heard the Netflix model, they give you 3 choices, right? Do a take-home test, do an on-site whiteboarding session, or do something over, like code pair. And that way you can accommodate the women who have, funky schedules with childcare, or the men who have funky schedules with childcare, or whatever stage you are in your life, to make sure that you're mining what you know and not just poking on what you don't, even though that's good fun sometimes.
I just want to back. I think that's a phenomenal answer. That's so. At Triplebyte we do tens of thousands of interviews, and I think one of the biggest things that we've found that can increase consistency and increase how predictive the interviews are of whether candidates go on to do well at companies is that philosophy of looking for reasons to say yes. Right. That every engineer out there has significant weak spots. So there's some question you can ask to every engineer that will make them look stupid, and that's true, definitely true for me. And if your interview process is ask a lot of questions, if they ever look stupid, don't hire them. Then a huge source of noise is just, did you happen to ask that one question that makes that one person look stupid? And so a much better way to approach it is, these are the things that matter for this role, and it doesn't matter what they don't know. It matters if they know the things that are super important for this role.
I guess the only other thing I'll add is look for referrals. Like there's people that have worked with, likely worked with that person, and it's very valuable to know to know how the feedback is, because a lot of times an interview is just a few hours of evaluation. If somebody has worked with someone for years, there's no substitute for that.
I'm curious, as a question to y'all. It sounds like you have used Carrot for some of these phone screen sort of substitute mechanisms. Do we think that's becoming more widespread and more normal? Because I think we've thought about that of hey, what if instead of a phone screen you have this online test and that sort of thing? But I feel like we've had the hesitance that some candidates might be rubbed the wrong way. That we're not actually taking the time to invest 45 minutes or an hour of our team's time to go do it. And I'm curious if you've had similar concerns, or how you think about that trade-off.
Okay. So the good thing about recruiting in general is that you can get a lot of data. So you can look at your entire funnel within the company and say, at each stage, what is the drop-off rate? How much time are engineers spending on interviewing candidates? And so a lot of our thinking actually got shaped by looking at the top of the funnel and trying to figure out what the pass-through rate was, and just how much time was being spent, and saying, okay, is there actually a different way to run that part of the funnel? So for us, or what we've seen is that senior candidates don't actually want to be phone screened, right? They have already proven themselves a lot within their company, within the industry, and so offering that as a stage is a deterrent for them. And so if you think of kind of entry-level engineers, more junior engineers, then it's a volume game as well, right? You want to sort of be able to consider a lot of people to make sure that there's some minimum threshold of, let's say, coding ability to code that you want. And so we've definitely used more online mechanisms of having them answer some or solve some problems. And so again, all of it is you want to drive hiring efficiency, especially when you're hiring at large numbers. Any sort of efficiency gain you can get can actually make a meaningful difference.
Let me give an answer to that, actually. So swapping roles here. I think there's actually an important diversity aspect to that. A thing that people forget often is that when someone applies to it, when people apply to a job and are screened out, that happens mostly at the resume stage. The majority of job applicants are screened out at the resume stage without anyone at the company ever speaking to them. And so the problem with making a relatively high cost to the company phone screen be the first point of contact is that you have to screen more aggressively at the resume level because it takes someone's time to put that hour on the phone. And so there is and that there's a real false negative rate there, right? In that pool of people you're screening out because the resume looks bad, it's going to be some people with, very diverse backgrounds, totally self-taught, couldn't go to college, currently working, in a factory, but very strong. And so putting in place a lower cost, partially or fully automated screen before the phone screen can actually help a lot with the diversity angle.
When do y'all phone screen then? If you're saying that like the senior candidates, they've proven themselves, and that more junior candidates, you also want that kind of economy of scale of automating it. When do you kind of decide to do phone screens for that initial conversation?
So some of it is actually based on what we think their level is. So if they're a senior engineer with a certain number of years of experience, especially if somebody we know internally has referred them, then that's actually a very good signal that it is actually worth just bringing them on site. Now, I think that you can also be a little bit more aggressive in the sort of on-site stage of if somebody is, not making it, like let's say they've gone through 3 or 4 interviews and you've interviewed enough candidates that you know that at that point it's not going to work out, then that's another way to just move this process along. But again, like Kathryn called out good points of, making sure that if it's a person from a non-traditional background, that your interview process isn't sort of unnecessarily pulling these people out of the process. So you need to, we're talking in kind of very general terms, but, I just want to call out that there are all of these other kind of nuances, and you just need to look at your funnel, need to look at the types of candidates. You should do an audit actually every now and then, every month, maybe just look at all the candidates that didn't make it through, and is there any learning that you can gain from it? Are most of your candidates failing one particular question? Again, maybe that means that question is actually not the right one. So again, great thing is there's so much data on this for your own company, your own recruiting funnel.
Yeah, I was worried that putting carrot in there was going to be a less of a personalized experience, but it does help winnow the funnel. And also, when I expressed that concern to them, they said, sometimes candidates, they're getting more used to it, and they really like talking to a third party. And so it's not a commitment. It's not like, oh, I just blew it with CZI. It's like, cool. And then they know it's standardized, and they do thousands of interviews. And these are people who are professionally trained, former engineers doing interviews. And so they feel like they're getting a fair shake, which has been really helpful for us. We don't use carrot for managers. We don't use carrot for, I think, above an IC6 or like a staff level developer. They're just not equipped to do that. For manager interviews, it's always a personal phone call or coffee with the hiring manager or director to make sure that, and that phone screen is not like, hey, reverse a linked list, or it's more like people, process, and projects, and like, let's get to know each other. So it doesn't feel like they have to do the dog and pony show with the interview.
Kathryn, how do you think about culture and culture fit? So this is, culture obviously is extremely important, but we've found that culture fit interviews are sometimes the most biased of the entire process. It's, it can reduce down to get in a room with a candidate and decide, does this feel like somebody who I want at my company? And that's a dangerous power to give a recruiter. Kind of how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's not culture fit that we're looking for. We're looking for culture augmentation. And, early in my career in the mid-90s, if I were to go in and people were looking at me as a culture fit, I would never have gotten hired, right? I'd be like, hey, bro. And I'm like, whoa. So, culture fit is hiring people that look like you and sound like you and have things in common with you and talking about the game or the college or things like that. And then you create an echo chamber. And so for us, the things that we screen on are humility, mission alignment, and make sure they're not an asshole, right? Like, I've interviewed so many assholes. They just don't get through. And that's really important. And for me, that is culture augmentation. Whatever situation you put folks in who are intelligent, get shit done, empathetic, and care about our mission, they're going to make our culture better, whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I plus one, like all of that. Like what we do at Opendoor is we have sort of 4 like technical interviews, and then we have a lunch interview, which is like non-technical. And we don't really talk about like that interview as being a culture fit interview. It's more of a like casual way to figure out what would make this person happy in their role and what would make this person unsuccessful. Like, are you going to be unhappy, spending like very pithy example, but like, do you want to be more of a PM type engineer who has a lot of agency in figuring out what they do, or do you want to sort of execute purely against a roadmap and that sort of thing? And I think we view that kind of 45-minute interview as not a culture fit interview, but of like, how can we tailor this more to you, and how do you make sure that you're going to be happy here and you're interviewing for the right team or that sort of thing. And throughout the entire process, we're looking for some of those red flags of like, is this person being disrespectful or rude or like that sort of thing. But we aren't, I think there's like a case of the culture interview, which is, here's our values. Like, can you tell me about a time that you like did something that did those values? And I don't think we get a lot. Either party really gets a lot out of those for us.
We have absolute veto power if someone fails that interview, if they're like the best coder ever and they're amazing. And I had a guy come around for their second round and everyone's like, he's fantastic. And I'm like, I'm going to break him during the interview about the like career and competency stuff. And sure enough, something came out that was just so offensive. You didn't get the job, right? You just can't. It's not just about the coding. Like, you have to make sure that people are going to be a part of your value system and have that. They're humble and they're open to feedback and they can communicate clearly and all of the things that are super important, to join the team directly. Yeah.
Cool. Let's go on a little bit to the closing, how to close engineers. Any advice for what you can do, Surabhi, during the interview process to kind of increase the probability of closing a candidate?
I mean, I think actually you're interviewing and closing all throughout the entire process, right? So when you're activating someone, that's, again, I mean, if somebody's really excited about interviewing, that means that, there is a higher likelihood that, if they have an offer, they will want to come in. So again, closing is throughout. Specifically during the interview process, I think it's just you have to pick your interview panel very carefully. Again, like since we spoke about senior candidates earlier, if you have a senior engineer interviewing and you have a bunch of junior engineers that are going to conduct those interviews, that's not sending a very good signal about the types of engineers that you have, because ideally you want to balance, right? That you have both junior engineers and senior engineers. So again, I mean, pick your panel carefully, figure out what message they want to convey as well. Like in any interview, you usually leave 5 to 10 minutes for questions, right? So you want to make sure that you have the people there that can speak to what that candidate might be interested in. So for example, let's say you're trying to hire a data engineer, then you want to make sure that your panel has people that can evaluate the person, but also give a sense of, where is that area of work going? What are the critical problems that really need to be solved? All of that, again, helps give enough context to the person that they, and hopefully they end the day with, okay, I met great people, they are smart, there are clearly big problems that I can solve here. So again, it's not an explicit closing, but it just helps give a little bit more positive signal along the way.
Have you ever removed an interviewer from interviews who's totally technically competent, but not good at coming across as excited and engaging for candidates?
Exciting and engaging, I don't know about that explicitly, but I have handpicked panels for sure, right? Like depending on who I think can sort of portray a certain message. So, either it's for us like volume hiring where, we just have people coming in and they go through our standard loops. But for a lot of the targeted roles, I am actually pretty involved in figuring out kind of what do we have the right set of questions? We have these kind of templatized interview panels, but I look at those for specific roles and try to figure out like, hey, actually for this role they're going to be working with a lot of other teams, so maybe we want someone to see how collaborative they're going to be, how can they think of roadmaps that coincide with a lot of other teams. So I've definitely custom designed panels and the people that would conduct the interviews.
One of the things I like to consider when I'm hiring talent is this a person that I would like interviewing for me? And if not, maybe they're not such a great fit, right? No, they're protected. This is a landmine. We can't have Bob interview anybody because last time Bob interviewed somebody, that weird thing happened, and now we can't get the candidate back, right? So sort of weeding out those folks up front and then making sure that you're building your interviewing bench because you don't want to keep hitting the same people over and over again because that just makes them bitter. Yeah.
Okay, let's go. Final question here. So can you give just an inspiring story of somebody from a very non-traditional background who you hired who worked out great?
I have an engineering manager who is a PhD in neurobiology, I believe, and he's brilliant, and he's intersected perfectly with what we're doing in science, and he's just a rising star in terms of his management ability and his ability to grok the science and also his technical abilities. So it's been a pleasure, yeah.
One of the interesting things that I think about with Opendoor and in the industry as a whole is like Opendoor has 200 engineers and data scientists, but we're actually a company of 1,000 people who are doing various types of operational roles in our cities, and some of those folks are answering phone calls or doing even like analytics queries and that sort of stuff. And one thing I'm really excited about is how a lot of programs can help those folks transition to software engineering roles. And so we've had one woman we sponsored her going to like one of these like boot camp things. She did that. She came back, started as an engineer, and it was awesome for someone to have that business context pre-existing of what we're already doing, and then be able to jump over and actually write code to solve a lot of those problems. And I think that's something at Opendoor. It's like something we're really excited about, and I think any other company like us that has a lot of those like giant operational arms, I think we want to keep sponsoring that because it's super awesome for everyone.
We had somebody from the sales team that actually really wanted to become a software engineer, and that person, taught themselves how to code, and then worked very closely with, one of our teams, and started taking on a lot of these side projects, and then eventually, actually, the person is transitioning into engineering. So I just like it when people have. Clearly, that person was working really hard, wanted to prove themselves, wanted to get into the field, and we should absolutely create such paths for these people.
I want to change my answer. Not that he's not great, but that's not really emblematic of what we're going for. We have an intern that we had this past summer who's first generation in college, and we flagged him sort of early on, like this is somebody who's going to need a lot of support and help during the internship. And so I put him on a team with a really strong mentor and a really strong manager. And he flew. He was phenomenal. He had a ton of support. It's not just getting them in the door, like getting folks in the door who are non-traditional applicants, but making sure that they're getting the care and feeding in terms of like the technical support and ramping and onboarding once they're there and feeling the sense of community. And he just accepted a couple weeks ago, and I literally cried. I was so happy that he's coming back, and he's found his people, and we found him, and he's going to be a huge contributor. I mean, the PhD guy is cool, but that's not really coming from like super non-traditional. Yeah, exactly. So very fired up about that hire.
Awesome. Let's do a few audience questions.
Yeah, so if you have a question, you got one over here, yeah, feel free to mention your name and then you can ask your question.
Hi, John. Thanks for coming out. For those that manage managers, I'm wondering what you've seen from your reports that kind of exceed your expectations on how to take part in the hiring process. I'm thinking specifically about top of the funnel and what engineering managers can do to help in that world.
I have two engineering managers that have not been super pleased with our current state of the recruiting team, and so they've really dug in and revamped the recruiting strategy and the approach and how we do things, and also the training and things around that. So they're not only handling a lot of the sourcing themselves, but they're also making sure that things are streamlined and that the engineering hiring managers know exactly what to do at what stage in the process and what's been most successful for them. And so they're not only engaging on the individual candidate level, but on the whole strategic hiring level, which is fantastic. And I consider that for my managers to be their top priority. The top priority is building your team. Yeah.
I think the three like mechanisms that I have for managers that I work with are one, we have like a 30-minute block on our calendars every week where we all get in a room and actually source together. And I think we have a sourcing team at Opendoor, but I think it helps one build empathy for that role of like what are the complexities, what are the knobs you can turn, that sort of stuff. And so that's sort of a forcing function for us to do a little bit of that. We have like sort of OKRs set for like blog posts that each team publishes. And so we try to say, hey, like each team, you need to have one blog post per quarter or something like that. And that's also another accountability mechanism. And the third is we also, like roughly every 6 months, we go back through, each manager goes through their team's like LinkedIns and sits down with each like employee and like clicks through every like profile and says like, hey, is this person, like, do you know this person? Is this person really good? Should we reach out to them and that sort of stuff? I think those three things like really, specifically for top of funnel, help kind of force that reach out. And then they all might continue that outside of those sort of three mechanisms as well, but those are like really three easy things to put in practice.
We're pretty big now where we have, a recruiting structure in place, a large recruiting team, sourcing team. So what stands out for me actually in managers is how proactive they are versus reactive, right? So I'll see some managers that, will identify that, hey, 3 weeks have gone by, I'm not seeing the progress I expect. Why don't we work with our recruiting partner, make these changes? They've sort of, just have a handle on what the problems are, while there are some people that, notice the problem much later, don't know exactly how to, solve for it. So some of it is experience, and some of it is just actually taking the interest and the time and the responsibility for growing your team and bringing in, the right people.
Take maybe 2 more questions over here on the right side.
Hey there, my name's Lucas Mercado, and I was particularly curious. There was a lot of conversation about culture and how you hire in and kind of maintain. What is culture to you? What does it mean? Not what culture do you have, but what does culture mean?
So, one of our core values is be a host, which is, how you're welcoming somebody into your house. That's a pleasant experience, right? And so, that core value that we have at Airbnb really resonates with me in terms of, what you're sort of looking for in people that you work with. Because ultimately, yes, like we all have business goals we're driving, but the more people can collaborate, the more there is that sort of connection. It's going to be much more fun and much easier to work.
I think there's some like catchy quote about culture are the things that happen. Culture is what happens when you're not paying attention or something like that, which also resonates a lot. But I think there's so many knobs and levers you have for culture of sort of post-recruiting of like, once someone joins, how do you welcome them into the office? Like, do you have their desk set up and ready? Do you have like onboarding programs that sort of imbue whatever practices or the like values that the company has? Day to day, how do you make tactical decisions as an engineering organization? How do you like make big, large changes and momentum on projects? I think a lot of those things define the culture, and they're also things that I don't think you can pick up super well on in an interview. I think the easiest things to pick up on an interview are like, is this person a jerk? Is this person being rude or offensive? All those sort of like red flags. But when you get into the nitty gritty of like, is this person imbuing a very specific value that we have? I think that's where you tend to like drift out of something very objective and into something more subjective.
Yeah, culture is the operating system of a company, and it is a collection of the company values, the team values, and the individual values that make up the group. And with any luck, they aren't always 100% aligned, and they're fun and interesting, but it really is the operating system.
I'm giving an answer as well. The definition I like is culture is the people in your company and their shared assumptions. I think that agrees very much with all these other answers. But a key point is when we say values, values don't necessarily mean what's on the wall called values. Values means what people actually value, and those things often don't agree.
I'll have one more question here in the front, and if you have any other questions, you're welcome to ask the panelists in person.
Hi, my name is Cheyenne. Do you think in tech world we have an implicit bias against people who work on visas? And I'm curious to know what you guys are doing to address that.
I would say in the tech world, there's an explicit bias against people who require visas. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really the hiring strategy, that is either forwarding or combating that, I would say. In some companies, we're not going after anybody with visa because it's just too expensive for us and we can't support it. The company's too small and we don't have the legal apparatus to make these things happen. In other companies, it's free for all, like get the best talent you can and we'll make it work, right? With the current administration, it's a little iffy, right? It's a little bit more complicated, making sure that the people you're hiring can actually secure visas in a timely fashion. So I would agree with you. It is an explicit bias, and it's really set by the hiring strategy and the budget and the appetite. Yeah, unfortunately. All right.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Let me just give I'll be remiss if I didn't make a brief pitch of my company. So hiring is really hard. If you guys want help hiring, come find me or my teammates, and we can help you.